Thank you. There's a few more seats down front. If we will kind of scooch together where there's an empty seat in, so get as many people sitting down as possible. My name is Walter White. I'm president of the Rutherford County Historical Society this year. And wow, am I happy to see everybody here tonight. This is awesome. Big hand. Big hand. Ben, this is not for you, this is for the gun.
How well do I know? In that case, we're going to charge admission. Everybody go out?
50-50. 50-50 with the historical
50-50,
side.
there you go.
Okay, I'll try and speak up as much as possible. I'm not sure how to operate this stupid thing.
You hold it to your mouth.
Oh. Like this?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. If you haven't signed in, please make sure you sign in on the piece of paper on the counter up there to get over with. If you're not a member of the Historical Society and you're whatever, there's an application form up front. With that, it's $25 a year. With that, you get 3 books, one of each C.B. Arnett's books. That will run through the end of 2020. The other thing is I forgot. I'm not sure where our program chairman is, Mr. Eddie Smotherman, and he's supposed to do the formal introduction of Judge McFarlin. I've known Ben since, wow.
I've already looked around. I know half of them.
Well, we're related to the other half. And we're related to the other half. That's it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ben and let him start his program.
Okay, thank you.
Watch your step.
Wow, what a crowd. I am truly honored. We still on? Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm truly honored. I was expecting, but not this. Standing room only. Wow. Makes me nervous.
Don't get the big head.
Pressure's on. Wife says, don't get the big head. I don't have to worry about that. Speaking about not getting the big head, when my wife and I were Sunday school class leaders once, and I'd just been elected and went to Sunday school class that time. Yeah, I'm going to tell it. And so we go in, and they say, well, your husband's a judge now. I guess when you go home, you've really got to watch it, don't you? And I told the class, I said, oh no, you don't understand. Every night after court, I go home to the Supreme Court. You know, everybody's been married a long time. Yeah, you understand that? Yeah, you understand. So, I think it's probably a pretty informed crowd, well-informed crowd. I'm curious, if some people come here from distances, we have, where do we come from out of county? From Nashville? Manchester? Sequatchie County?
No.
Cannon County.
Hutchins County.
Humphreys, oh, okay. There's somebody from, yes sir?
Cumberland County.
Cumberland, and then there was Kentucky, right?
Ray County.
Ray County.
Georgia.
And then Georgia.
Murray County.
Murray County. Wow, what a crowd, I'm honored. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do, in case some of you, I know there's one or two that don't know the story. Where's Bud Morris? Bud? A long time fraternity brother. I know Bud knows the story, so we'll go over the basics, but not to bore you, and then we'll try to get into some new stuff too. So I like to tell folks the way this story starts off. Some of us more seasoned people remember Jimmy Stewart and Shenandoah. It starts off, this story, Jimmy Stewart and Shenandoah, and ends up with Mel Gibson in The Patriot. So the man we're telling you about, Jack Hinson, was from the Dover area, and I'd say one of my all-time, if not my all-time favorite Western is Clint Eastwood's The Outlaw Josie Wells.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, that's it for me. And you know, at the start of it, when they, how many of y'all remember that one? Oh, yeah. So you remember at the start, when they get to bring in the Confederates to surrender, and then they mow them down with the Gatling gun, and then the Confederate officer who got them to come in and who was deceived is talking to the red leg, and said, well, you still got Josie Wells out there. He says, you still got problems. You got Josie Wells out there in the Union guy. Well, you just take about 5 or 10 men and go take care of Mr. Josie Wells. Remember how he said that? And then the Confederate guy said, oh no, you don't understand. Here's the line. Josie Wells is a man who lived by the feud. The story tonight is a man who lived by the feud. So at the start of the Civil War, it didn't take too long for Fort Donelson and Fort Henry to fall. So this area, around the Dover area, was controlled by the Union forces. Jack Hinson was maybe the second wealthiest plantation owner in the area. So he was okay with being neutral. Jimmy Stewart and Shenandoah. He was okay starting off being neutral. He had good holdings, and so at the battles up there, when they were fighting the battles for Fort Donelson and Fort Henry, he would go across the battlefield because both sides knew him, and he'd give information to both sides. And he was hedging his bets, but he was doing, protecting himself. Even to the point, neutral to the point where, that was one of Grant's early battles, one of his early successes. And even Grant had visited in Jack Hinson's house in his plantation. So things rocked along pretty well, starting like that. Till one day, Jack Hinson had two of his sons decided to go squirrel hunting. One 22, one 17. So they get their, their small bore rifles, go out, road out there. They go squirrel hunting early in the morning. The Union troops they would have patrols to go and patrol. They caught them out there with their squirrel guns, but the problem is they accused them of being bushwhackers. And then there was this was in the Missouri area. They had general orders down that literally Union troops, anybody they suspected of being a bushwhacker, they could kill them on the spot. They could go kill their family and burn it. It's just, and if they thought they were implicit, they could even go to the neighbors. Now, I don't know that it happened that much, but the general orders read they had that authority. So they accused his two sons, a 22 and a 17-year-old, of being bushwhackers, killed them, dragged their bodies around the town, cut their heads off, hung their heads on the gatepost to the Hinson house. Jack Hinson was no longer neutral. As a side to this, Colonel Tom McKinney, who wrote this book, told me that for those, when Bud and I were in, it was CNGS, Command and General Staff. I don't know, what is it now?
Still Command General Staff.
Still Command and General Staff. One of the suggested readings before you become a general is this book's on the approved list of what not to do to the local populace to get them riled up. And that's the key to that. So he kept his head. Jack Hinson kept his head. But he swore an oath that anyone in a blue uniform he would try to kill, but he's going to start with the officers because they gave the command to kill those two boys. So they didn't do anything to him then. Later, it turns out that the Union in control there decided he was too complicit, and they put up with enough. He had a son who had a guerrilla group, and he had another son who fought for the South, who was in Virginia. So they just thought they'd had enough of him. So word got to him that they had finally made a decision they were going to go burn him out, maybe even take him into custody. It was a snowy night in December. He got the word. He got slaves to get his family up, pack what they could on a big sleigh, snowing. They sent him over to another county to some family, but he didn't even go with them. He sent them. They got out before the Union troops came, and then they burned his place down. He had 2 daughters in that snowy night move in the deep snow with the sleigh that had the measles. They wound up dying. That's 2 more. That's 2 more. He could put, maybe not put on them, but that was bad. He did own slaves. I forget to tell this sometimes, but I'm gonna remember it now. He was a good businessman. He saw, and y'all know, slaves of the Confederates were being taken as property and made to work. Sometimes almost worked to death, not given proper food, proper care, proper shelter. It's a fact that it happened. Look at Fort Negley. They went to a church and rounded a bunch of them up one Sunday morning, take them out of the Lord's house. So anyway, so he had a cure for that. Before the proclamation that Lincoln gave in the summer of '62, Jack Hinson made his slaves free persons. They couldn't touch them. They were free men and women. And so they stayed with him, and they couldn't touch him. And of course that gave a loyalty too at the time, I would guess. I'm not saying it was all that humanitarian. Smart business too. There's a reason he was the second most prominent plantation owner in the county. So, he had this rifle made. It's 50 caliber, 17 pounds, 7 ounces. He had it specially made. You'll never see another one like it. I've had people say, oh, you know, there's a pretty lively Civil War market. Guns, rifles, bullets, you know, trading. I had some people say, well, what's that? Have you got that praise? What's that rifle worth? There's no comparable. And if I go to somebody and ask them, an expert, what do you think it's worth? What's going to be their comparable? There isn't one. So we just keep it in a real safe place. Right, baby? So he had this rifle specially made. You notice it doesn't have shiny spots on it. Basically, the only shiny spot is German silver on the end. So he had it specially made. Every time he was sure that he killed a Yankee, he would notch the barrel. We're going to let you come up and look at those. It's got down the barrel 36 notches. He only notched when he was sure that he'd killed him. He didn't count the wounds. He didn't count a hit. Just when he felt they were sure. There's speculation on if it was more. Colonel McKinney thinks those are just the ones he got on the ground and he could put a boot on. He thinks it might have been 80 to 100. But what Jack Hinson would do, his favorite way of being a bushwhacker, which we now call snipers, was he got on the riverbank. He would build duck blinds. He'd shoot off the top of bluffs. There was a place called Grafton-Reed Bluff, and it was way high. He operated between the Tennessee and the Cumberland rivers, and as the gunboats would come by, it was one of his preferred way. And there was a place then, before they made the lake, that had an island, towhead chute. So on this island, when the river was going one way, it was like those rides at Opryland used to be, the log thing, the flume, you know, the current, because the island in the middle, there was a big current, you go, whoom. But when the boat was going the other way, because the motors didn't have the horsepower they have now, it would take it about 30, 40 minutes to get through there. That was Jack Hinson's 30 or 40 minutes. He would sit up on that bluff and pepper the boat. You notice plain sights, called open sights. you seen the Civil War pictures, you know, where they had the big long tube and all those kind? It's not that. So we've been there. Anybody else been there? I bet somebody has. Wow.
Where?
The bluff there, where we used to shoot down. No Name Cave was up there, the cave up there, with names written, name rock cave. So, from the top of that, the colonel we've been up there. The colonel who wrote the book, Tom McKinney, is retired Marine. You're Marines? He done you proud. He did good, didn't he? So, from the top of that bluff down to where the boats were, he was making kill shots. Colonel took a laser range finder, 500-600 yards. 500-600 yards. It's 50 caliber. You'll see how thick the barrel is when you get to see it. And there's just various stories.
Where did, you said he had it made, so.
Yeah, so after his book came out, you'll see initials on here that are like real rough engraved, W-E-G. After his book came out, somebody with the Tennessee Historical Society had written a book on gun makers, and he calls up the colonel and says, I got your man, William E. Goodman in Lewis County. In an adjoining county, not too far away. And so it just had to have been him. Gun makers in Tennessee and Kentucky during the 1850s and 1860s. W-E-G, the only W-E-G on the list.
How did come up with the possession of this?
We can get into that.
Okay.
Because that's a big local draw. My great uncle by marriage was Major Charles Anderson. Those are his 1851 Navy coats on the back straps. He was aide and then adjutant for Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was in his escort. So, and his initials are engraved there and has Nathan Bedford Forrest, Cavalry. So, Jack Hinson was, of course, hiding from the Yankees. I mean, he could not go to major byways. They have rewards out for him. You know, they got word of what he was doing. He set his family up safe. Then he started taking his revenge. And so, Henson did scouting and would take Forrest when he was on raids in that area. They were under a shade tree one day resting, and Jack Hinson, my great uncle, was talking to Henson, and then Henson explained to him why he was doing what he was doing. That is written up in, y'all know Bromfield Ridley's book. Y'all all know that. That's old news to most of you. But if it's not, you need to come up and look and see if you can get a copy of the reprint. But this book was first written up, it's 1906, I think, about that publication date. And that was the first mention of him, and it has a picture and mentions about Major Anderson. That book is amazing. It also has a couple of sections on when they dedicated on the square the Southern statute, Southern Infantryman out there, and says everybody was there in their speech and everything is in that. I'm not going to go through the detail, but there's also a letter in there saying how, it's what it is. It's a book of the 3 and 4, 5, 6 page stories all about Civil War that was written before it was lost. It also tells you how Robert E. Lee was able to acquire his horse named Yay, that's the best response I've ever had. How he got a traveler who was originally named Jeff Davis, by the way. But we've got too much else to talk about, I guess, to go into much detail. So, but it's a great book, and the reprint's a whole lot cheaper than buy it an original if you can find one. So, did you ask how I got the rifle? Okay, so at the end of the war, they never got Jack Hinson. They never captured him. He was under, because when the war was over, the Southern troops could swear allegiance, and then they could go home. But he wasn't in the Confederate Army. He was a bushwhacker, so he was subject to military tribunal and execution on the spot. And he was under military tribunal when he died, 1874. So, at the end of the war, they never got him. He did all that scouting and developed a relationship with Nathan Bedford Forrest. So he gave that rifle to Nathan Bedford Forrest, who gave it to my great-great-uncle.
Wow.
My great-great-uncle, instead of giving it to his son or daughter, gave it to his, I presume his favorite nephew, my great-grandfather. So, and then my grandmother gave it to me. So yeah, a local crowd appreciate this. So
Who
this
gets it
came.
after you? Ben?
Well, I've got two kids. We'll see. Neither are all that interested just yet. We'll see. The bidding war started. So it came down to my mother, and a lot of my mother's sister was Virginia Woodford. So I've had a lot of people ask, how come you got that instead of Bubba? And that's kind of curious myself too. So I was with Bubba once. I'm talking about Bubba Woodford, not from here. He's kind of a
Icon.
he's an icon. Yeah, he really is an icon. So we were going to a funeral once, and it'd been a funeral, and he and I were riding the hearse going little country road. I said, Bubba, I'm going to just ask you, because Bubba was older than me, and he great personality. I said, how come I got that instead of you? Because I figured he'd give me the straight. I was always told, I grew up on the battlefield, so my grandmother gave it to us because we were on the battlefield. I never really bought that. So I looked at Bubba and I said, Bubba, how come I got it instead of you? He said, well, I'll just tell you, so he and I shared a grandparents, and the first cousins. He said, well, I'll just tell you, that rifle was hanging on my wall for a while, and then they asked me when it came time to divvy up, did I want our granddaddy's hunting rifles? He had a couple of hunting rifles that Bubba was hunting with, but did I want that rusty old Civil War rifle? And he told my grandmother, he said, I want, we called him Little Graham. He said, I want Little Graham's, hunting rifle so I can go out hunting with you. And I said, well, that makes sense. And he said, we both got the better of the bargain. Because I never knew that grandfather. He died when I was 3. So that's how we got it. Now, let me just touch on this. So Major Anderson, the local people know this, he's a Rutherford County. And so how he got involved in the war, let me take a minute or two in case any of you don't know that, because this is a great story. So Major Charles Anderson lived in the Florence area when his father came. He was born in Frankfort, Kentucky. His father came down and was the first warden of a penitentiary in Tennessee. He came over to start penitentiary, I guess, be a warden. So he was 10 years old. So his parents were going to get Charles Anderson living in Nashville. He wanted to go to college to Cumberland, and so he started off with preschool, and they had a Dr. Moore from Oxford for the preschool studies. So it was a very good education in Nashville at the time, an Oxford professor. And so he went through that training for a while, got an eye infection, had to drop out. Then he went into warehousing, steamboat, railroad, and so when the war started, he gets a commission out of nowhere for quartermaster. Transportation and quartermaster combined then. And so he goes down and does that for a while. He doesn't like it. He wants to be in the field, he said. So he comes back to Florence. And when he came back, since he had resigned his commission, he knew that he had difficulties because Nashville was in Union lines in. So, interesting, a couple of locals went to the general in Nashville to vouch for him that he'll do what he says, and they would call it a furlough back then. So one of them was his neighbor, Thomas Horde, vouched for Major Anderson to the Union general. So the deal was he reported every Saturday to the Union general, make sure everything's okay. Well, the lines changed, and then the Confederates took over for a while. As they were changing, the Federal troops, and this is the main road from Murfreesboro to Nashville, where he lived in Florence. So the Union troops came as they were leaving, retreating. They went to his house, took out portraits, tacked them on the tree, did saber practice, burned his house, cleared out his slaves, burned their quarters. So then he really wanted to get involved and be in the field. So a week or two after that, Forrest is traveling from Murfreesboro to Nashville. Anderson gets on his horse and follows him and says, I want to join up with you. I want to be in the field. And Forrest had people, all kinds of people asking him. You know, his reputation was established by then. So he said, well, we're in Columbia, come over, we'll find a place for you, probably won't be with me. So a couple of weeks later, Anderson goes to Columbia, reports to Forrest to see where he needs to go from there. Just turns out that General Bragg had sent a very important communique to Forrest then. And his adjutant wasn't there at the time. So he looks at Anderson and says, you know, would you draft this if I dictate it? Now, you all know you're an informed crowd. You know Forrest was not formally educated. He's quoted as saying that there's a pen sitting on the desk, he'd rather be looking at a snake as far as his comfort level. And that was true. So Anderson said, yes, sir, I'll be glad. Forrest dictates the emergency answer to the communique. It's 3 pages. So after that, Anderson says, of course, he had this good training, right? This good education. He said, well, would you allow me to just work on that a little bit, General? Yeah, sure. So he condensed the 3 pages to 1 and reads it back to General Forrest. And Forrest looks at it, and this is a direct quote from Anderson in one of his writings. He said, as far as you know, what's on them there, that there 1 page, was on that there 3 pages? He said, yeah, but if I'll add anything you want. He said, nope. He signed it and said, you're gonna serve with me. You're gonna be with me the rest of the war. So he was with him almost basically after the Murfreesboro campaign. So Anderson, and the local people know this, but you others need to know it. Anderson did all of his correspondence from then on, personal, military. It is undisputed that Rutherford County Major Anderson wrote Forrest's farewell address. That's old news to y'all. But he wrote all of his correspondence, and they became very close, very friends. Hence the rifle from Forrest to Anderson.
Okay, that's
okay. A couple of interesting stories for those of you that may not. Oh, I've got to tell this. So Hinson is credited with getting Nathan Bedford Forrest where he needed to be for the Johnsonville raid. We're familiar with the Johnsonville raid. For those of you who are not, Johnsonville, Tennessee was just up north of where this was, and it was a major supply depot, one of the top 3 or 4 in the South. It was the depot that supplied Sherman. Ooh. So,
Amen.
That supplied Sherman. So they didn't think he could get him in. So Henson got Forrest in through some swamps where he could attack the depot. And the way Forrest was able to get his cannon, it was a bluff, and it was on a river, Johnsonville on a river, and they had gunboats and they had cannon. But this is great, where Henson got them in, the Union cannon could not fire on them. The gunboats were going below, the ones on the bluff were going over. They had a safe zone.
Huh.
So Forrest, they opened up at 2 o'clock, and they wiped this depot out, like 2 miles of fires. One point, Forrest, they're having so much fun, Forrest and 2 of his generals took over one of the cannons and were firing it. 3 generals firing a cannon down on Johnsonville. And of course, the artillery guys were back, it was Captain Morton, was back laughing at the generals as Forrest would say, okay, bring her up, you know, no artillery terms whatsoever for our marker guy back there. No artillery terms, and they were just laughing, having the time of their lives. So after Johnsonville got wiped out, this is when you had, and what Henson did on that, this is when Sherman had that famous quote, "That devil Forrest." he's got to be killed if it costs 10,000 troops and bankrupts the U.S. Treasury. Remember that quote?
Yeah.
That's it. And that was Henson's part in that. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I've been talking 30 minutes. It's like, we're gonna have, anybody wants to come down now? Everybody will come down, we'll have the baptism. Okay, when the last time the gun was fired, so it's not been fired in my lifetime. But when I came back from law school in '73, I spoke to the local SAR, Huey King and Jimmy Haynes and some of them, and it was at Huey King's house where they tore it down. There's like 10 of them. So I go bring the rifle and they're like you, a very informed group. And they politely listen and then they start telling me stories. But it just so happened that I had a cousin there, a retired judge out of Nashville, Judge Roy Miles, who was in his 80s. And I knew that was his.
Going well. No.
And he has a son named Roy.
Yeah.
But the daddy was there.
Yeah.
And they're cousins. And he looked at that. And he didn't live here, he just visited Huey. And he had a twinkle in his eye and said, I can't believe I'm seeing that rifle again. He said, when we was little boys, Uncle Willie, my great-grandfather, Uncle Willie would get us boys and we'd see how much powder we could pack in that barrel, and we'd shoot mini balls through the old schoolhouse, the old brick schoolhouse. Well, the brick walls were like, it wasn't veneer, it was like 2 feet brick. It was real brick. And they would load it up.
They get in trouble today.
They call it juvenile detention today.
Statute of limitations on vandalism.
Statute of limitations. So I just know it hadn't been fired in my lifetime. You'll see it has a set trigger on it too, for accuracy. Yes, sir.
Judge, is there any idea what it might have cost back then to have a rifle like that manufactured?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know. He was fairly wealthy, and the stories are he kept sending money back to take care of his former slaves.
Okay.
And then after the war, he went to Magnolia, a place called Magnolia, and bought a place with a mill and everything. So he'd done well financially, but I don't know what it cost.
So you did say he was basically a fugitive after the war. Where did he finally end up that he could take refuge?
Well, he bought this place that was in an adjoining county. They set up, family moved there.
Okay.
And it turned out to be basically south of where they were originally, but he's not the original place. He's not a man to be trifled with. You know, they had rewards out, and there was a local guy there. Jack got word that was trying to turn him over to the Union to get his reward. So Jack, and this is documented, Jack goes on the guy's house, knocks on the door, the wife comes to the door. He says, is Mr. Such and Such here? She said, yeah, he's in here. He said, would you have him step out? So the guy steps out in the hall, he pulls out his pistol and kills him. Which reminds me, so, you not only, and by the way, nobody did anything. I think there's a certain amount of sympathy for what happened to his sons, and I think that helped him with the military tribunal. People were sympathetic of what they did to his sons, so they cut him some slack. So a lot of people think. So not only does it have the 36 notches down the barrel, it's got 3 lines on the front that are distinct, or 4, at least 4. And the power of oral history is something. Our family had an oral history. The Hensons had an oral history. We didn't know each other. And as Carl McKinney was putting his book together, he found out that they meshed just 100%. But I never really noticed those marks on the front of the barrel. And so nobody knows what they're for, really. They're speculation. Some think they're for the ones that actually killed his sons. Some think that they didn't get the dignity of a regular punch on the barrel, and that they were just local scallywags that had been doing things to people they shouldn't, and just, we'll say, needed killing. Don't know why they're there. But what I find fascinating is we were in Aaron, Tennessee. Colonel and I, when the book first came out, but we do dog and pony shows, the Army called it. And we'd go and he'd give the talk, and we'd let people look at the rifle, and he'd sign books. My wife would sign books. We were at Aaron, and ran in, somebody came up and you said, hey, I haven't seen you since MTSU days, good to see you. And I never even noticed those marks. And I hadn't seen her since college. And she said, you know, my granddaddy told me those marks on the front of the barrel, different from the other, were for the people that killed his sons. I mean, the oral history was going down, even down to my generation. I think that's pretty neat. Who give you other questions?
I had another question. If it weighs almost 18 pounds,
Yeah.
did he just set up on a tripod?
It was actually made tree limbs, tripod. There's no way you can steady that for that kind of shot.
Okay.
Absolutely. Let me open up some other questions. Okay, let me tell, yes, sir.
So you say it's 50 caliber, do you know what he was shooting as far as how many grams of powder?
Carl McKinney talked about 100 grams. I'm not a black powder guy, I just don't know.
100 grams? Okay.
That's what he says. So one last story and then more questions and then see what you want to do. So, how many of y'all familiar with the 100-acre field story? So, they had charcoal. They made charcoal there in Dover. And to do that, of course, they cleared trees for the woods. And they have not a lot of 100-acre fields, not even now. So there's a 100-acre field. One day, Henderson was on his horse going through the field. He was going over sagebrush. He saw 3 Union guys coming. And he knew they weren't part of an organized patrol because there's only 3 of them. He figured they were out freelancing, maybe trying to find him for the reward money. So he drops his rifle in the sagebrush, goes up to him, and because they didn't know his face, they just said, hey, how you doing? Hey, we're looking for Jack Hinson. Do you know Jack Hinson? He went, yeah, I know Jack Hinson. He said, well, have you seen him lately? Yeah, I've seen him lately. Well, where'd you see him? So he gave them a location away from there. And they said, okay, hey, thanks. Then he took a shortcut.
Yeah.
And then when they got to that location, he killed all 3. Now, Colonel told that story, and that was mostly oral history, but he gave a talk one time, and somebody from that area came up and said, I can show you those grave sites. He went, what? He said, of course, they didn't report back. By the time they found the remains, it was probably not a pretty sight, so they put some markers on the spot. He said, I can take you to that little out-of-the-way road, and there's 2 old headstones of those Union soldiers. Wow, okay. I don't want to wear out my welcome. Questions?
Judge, I'm looking at the book, and there's a photograph of the rifle from Colonel McKinney. He says that there are 3 circles that represent kills of a distance of more than 1,000 yards, all the way across.
That's his research, so I go with whatever he said. The oral tradition was he shot 3 across the Tennessee River, and we were at a and I hadn't thought to tell him that before the book was published. I said, yeah, Colonel. Somebody came up to me and said, hey, I heard you saw 3 from all the way across to Tennessee. And I said, oh yeah, Colonel, I forgot to tell you that. And he said, well, that's amazing. Their oral tradition, our oral tradition, that's probably what they're referring to, be my guess.
What has happened to Colonel McKinney? I haven't heard from him in quite
well,
some time.
He's still up in Kentucky, I called him before I came here and he didn't answer. They sold the movie rights to this, and they've been looking at different things. Just nothing's happening. Actually, I was calling to ask him what was the status of that. But there's some different people have talked about it, but nothing's happening right now.
He's not very good health.
But he's hanging in there, we'll put it that way.
He was working on another book, Atrocities of the Civil War, and he was going to use
He gave you?
That's right. He was going to use my great-grandmother, Minerva Kelton Lowe, when she was stabbed in the stomach in her 7th month of pregnancy, as the lead story.
So he was working on his next book, Atrocities, and he was trying to get them from both sides. I think he was getting more from the Southern perspective from the other, and his worry was he wanted a book that would have a draw more than just Southern. But he hadn't done it. Yes, sir.
I apologize if I missed you saying this already, but
No problem.
that looks like maple, is that maple?
Yeah, tiger, I've heard it called tiger maple.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yes, sir.
About how fast could he shoot that gun?
Well, Colonel thinks he developed a speed load technique, hence that's why he got those guys from the 100-acre field. I don't know where he did that. By the way, for those of you who ain't got the book, when you get it, it's indexed and it's got everything he has in there. He has where he had it from. I mean, how often do you see that?
Your Honor, if you were to be the person to pick the man starring as Jack Hinson, who would you choose? I choose you.
I always kind of thought of Tommy Lee Jones. A little ornery. Maybe an earlier Clint Eastwood, but I don't know.
Has that rifle, has it ever been in a gun article in any of the periodicals, any like National Rifle Association, like their rifle?
Well, there's a National Snipers magazine that came down. What's the name of that, Sniper?
We can Google anything.
Yeah, they came down from Ohio. They came down once, Sniper magazine. And they came down and they did an article on it. Yes, ma'am.
What was the unit that, the Union soldiers that killed this?
It was Colonel Lowe, 5th Cavalry of Iowa, but they were really mainly from Nebraska. It was 5th Iowa, Colonel Lowe, but they really, and they weren't well disciplined, they weren't well trained, they weren't well armed.
Did Jack Hinson have a wife? And what did she
Yeah,
do after this?
Elizabeth. He had a son, Robert, who was an irregular, who was very effective. He wasn't part of CSA, but he was considered a local Union troops called him Henson's Irregulars. So yeah, Elizabeth. Yes, sir.
Can the graves of the two sons be found that had their heads cut off?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and they were Jack Hinson's buried, and I think they have a celebration up there. They used to have a celebration every year or so of his birthday. It's amazing, the book is still selling. Last Monday, my wife and I drove to Dixon. I'd rather be here because the drive, but they treated me great over there. Us great. So we drove to Dixon last Monday night. And what was I gonna say? What'd you ask?
About the books.
Oh, yeah, the books, yeah. So this book is still selling. And the person who had us over there says they're teaching it some in the Dixon school, and a little bookstore in Dixon will sell 10 to 15 copies a month. And when, he tried to get UT Press to take it just very quickly. He tried to get UT Press to print it. It's a blind committee of 3. If anyone on blackballs it, they can't do it. 2 approved, 1 said no. 1 that liked it told him he need to go to Pelican. God blessed him. Pelican was the best thing that could have ever happened. And so the publisher of Pelican liked it so much, he promised him it would never go to paperback. It would always be hardback. As long as he was living, he's passed away since then. As long as that owner and publisher was living, that book never went to paperback. And they're still selling them. I got a call today from somebody, calls up, hey, you got that rifle, can I come see it? Yeah, we've had them come, I don't know if I mentioned it, we've had them come from Australia and New Zealand and England. The one from New Zealand that came was in charge of buying all the arms, they call it New Zealand Defense Force. He was the one, he's in charge, of buying all the arms for New Zealand. And he was visiting Barrett. And they just read the book, found out about it in Australia. I've had people, soldiers from, call, hey, can I see it? I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan, and they pass it back and forth. So, yes.
So, so was he taken back to Dover to be buried? Hinson.
Yeah, he's there in Dover. He's there in Dover. Yeah.
Judge, I wanna commend you first of all, because you kept it in your family, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful, piece of history, but I would like for you to comment on, for example, we have had, some recent situations where, for example, in Richmond, the Museum of the Confederacy, a lot of those things that were donated there are now no longer on display at Trafalgar, because of people like, Wade Rawls and others who intentionally, feel that some things have to be so politically correct. What are your plans, for the future of how this is gonna be cared for?
Right now, I think it's going down to our children and hope they'll be doing the same thing I'm doing. Quick story, these questions jog me. This used to be in the War Memorial. My grandmother McFarlin, my grandmother Black had it in the War Memorial, and we just went to check on it once, and they had all these rifles and little cards, you know, with the story on them, you know, with the rifles. Well, they had the wrong card with the rifle. She took it home. We took it home with us.
The Historical Society is always looking for wonderful pieces like this.
And we did them on.
No plans other than that.
The reason that I asked that
I had some
question
people ask,
is
say, I
because-
consider it like the Sam Davis home or something.
Right, the reason that I asked that question is because a lot of people who entrusted the Museum of the Confederacy in Richmond, who gave a lot of really priceless items,
They're gone.
they're gone.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
Yeah, so for right now, we're hanging on to it.
Very brief question. There was a gentleman that had a quasi-museum in the Dover area to Jack Hinson, but I understand he's passed on. Do you know what's happened to
I
the
don't.
artifacts?
I don't. I don't. I just, since you hadn't walked out on me yet, the first time we showed this, we went to Dover for the grand premiere, you know, and it was at Dover. And so they took us out to eat at the restaurant ahead of time. And then we went to the library, local library.
And we're a little late, so everybody was already in there.
And we were a little late getting back. And so the place was packed, because this is Dover. The people grew up with this. And this is, if you're from Dover, this is sacred. It really is. So I didn't have the cover on the rifle then. And so when Brenda and I came in, we walked from the back to the front, longer than this. And you remember, and it was honest to goodness, remember the old E.F. Hutton commercial?
Yeah, where he wants it.
When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. As we walk from row to row, people with the backs like you, from row to row, and when they saw us walking, every conversation stopped. Every conversation stopped. And by the time we got up to the front, you could hear a pin drop. It was, she's nodding her head.
Over 200 people.
Over 200 people. It was surreal. It was surreal.
With the new, museum coming online here probably on January in Elm Springs, would you be, if they asked you to put that on display for a showing, would you be looked at for that?
I just have to consider it. I'm not really fond of leaving something overnight or anything like that. I just don't.
Well, no, but I mean, if you asked, but they had you for the day, you could do it, right?
That's something we consider case by case basis, sure. Yeah. Yeah, we've been to Mississippi. We've been all around Tennessee. Carl doesn't get out like he did. Okay, I'm sure it's getting late.
No, if you're finished, that's all right, you go right ahead.
Other questions?
Yes, does Major Anderson have descendants in Murfreesboro now?
Yeah.
Does. I know one.
You know one?
Yeah.
Another interesting part of this is, y'all know, yeah. Y'all know Ray Seven.
Yes.
Yeah.
So another question is, see, he's, Charles Anderson is her great-great-grandfather. See, so when I was president of the Tennessee Judges Association, Sessions Judges, I got Ray to come speak. And then one event we had was the rifle and the colonel and then her husband, Huey. And so when I was talking to Ray about that event we had at Oakland's Mansion, and we had the rifle there presenting it, and she kind of looks at me once and said, "No, wait, he was my great-great-grandfather, just your great-great-uncle by marriage. How come you got it instead of me?" I said, "Well, he liked my great-grandfather more than he did your great-grandparents, I guess."
She was just a lowly astronaut.
She's just in the Astronaut Hall of Fame with her husband, you know. She'll have to settle for that, I guess. Yes, sir, Representative.
Real quick, can you talk about the Veterans Court and the great work y'all are doing real fast? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay. Well, almost 4 years ago, I started a Veterans Treatment Court. They're going across the country. Veterans come back, PTSD, TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. They come back trying to cope with the stress. Addictions are tough for them. They get run-ins with the law. So instead of just locking them up, we started a court with the help of our legislature and greatly appreciated. And so I have a Veterans Treatment Court where on Wednesdays I hold court, and it's for the veterans. And what we do, we give them a chance, instead of being in jail, they get released with a plea agreement. It's intensive. They get counseling. They get help from the VA. There's a treatment team. The treatment team consists of a caseworker, a manager, a peer specialist from the VA who's been in that situation once. A VA representative has all the records, someone from the DA, someone from the public defender, someone from the jail. And so we spend it's a year and a half of intensive. And then the lives have been changed, been amazing. The first one we had was a Vietnam vet, been on cocaine for 40 years and graduated. And we just had that. So we're having a graduation September 18th. You want to come up second floor. It's impressive. They get up there and tell how their lives have been changed because of this treatment team. And I'm blessed to be able to serve in that. Thank you. And he's been to our graduation, so we appreciate you.
Yeah, remember I led the clap?
You did. Well, when the guy said, he got up there and I said, "You went through without any sanctions and you did that?" And he said, "I told you, I gave you my word." And then that's when you started to clapping. Yeah, veteran said, "Well, I gave you my word." And then he graduated and did well. Okay, I probably ought to do this. If you have questions, I'll make myself available, okay, for your other questions in case some of you may want to go ahead and do something else. I want to go ahead and start looking at the rifle. Is that okay?